in a general way, yesterday was about site and how you relate to the position of your building in the territory. Today could, I call it program, but it could be something close to that. It's how you develop the building from this from the point of view of the program. If you know Giuseppe Terrani, he's an architect active in the 1920s. He had a very short career because he died young. His best known work is maybe the Casa del Fascio, the fascist party headquarters in Como. But actually, for me, this is the most amazing building he designed. It's a housing building in Milan, in a very central avenue, where he had to contend with the fact that he was working for a bourgeois society that had a certain idea of representing themselves to the street, and he wanted to do a fundamentally modern building. It's a wonderful housing building with innovations in the typology of access, in the typology of the flats, in everything. But I find this drawing very, very interesting because he's tackling how to balance these amazing modern ideas that he was carrying with this bourgeois representation that he needs to create for the building, for the clients he's working for. So he's trying to see what's the minimum amount of bourgeois strategy that he has to put on the building to make it stand in this context in Milan. So if you'll see, there's a corner here where he writes it. Yeah. So there's a stone base and a brick and glass and gallery center, and this stone base is giving these moments of connection with the surrounding buildings and the surrounding city. And in this drawing you cannot see, but if you go see the other facade, there's a semi-enclosed patio that concentrates all the vertical and horizontal axis of the apartments, that is open towards the main avenue, and it creates an amazing typology. This semi-enclosed patio is the facade that is facing the main avenue has balconies that are open towards the patio and towards the street, that create a completely new way of designing the facade of a housing building to this avenue. So it's an architect tackling the culture of his society, the ideas that he wants to promote that were almost revolutionary, or certainly revolutionary for the context for the cultural context of Milan at the time. So it's trying to achieve this balance in between what your clients and what your culture is expecting and what you want to impose to make your culture advance. So it's a drawing where you see this balance happening in several stages of development. There's some detail at the end because I believe the drawing was cut, but there's some detail of the stereotype of the stone, and yeah. So this would be the corner of the building or something like it. But from a completely different point of view, this is Carlo Maderno was commissioned to finish the facade of St. Peter in Rome. Oh. So it's a combination of the work of many generations of architects. Yeah, this is a facade of St. Peter. This is the dome. So here you have Michelangelo following Raffael, following so lots of people, the most famous architects in Italy, working through successive generations for different clients and trying to come up with the best possible translation of Christianity and perfection in a building, and Maderno at the end coming after Bernini, I think.
Bernini.
Before Bernini, sorry. So this is
essentially coming after Michelangelo.
Coming after, the first. Sorry. So the dome was made, and he had to create. And it's funny to think about the series of problems, because there was always this tension in the successive generations of the people that were involved in the plan of St. Peter, if it was a central space or if it was a longitudinal space. And
which was a theological argument, as much as anything.
As much as anything. So the role of the dome from the facade, from the front view, increases and diminishes as this debate is going on. So after Maderno comes with his proposal to turn it clearly into a longitudinal space, Bernini comes and he creates the plaza in front of it so that you see it again as a more centralized space, and the dome gains more importance. But the interest of this drawing is this idea of a combination of pieces, because this will go on the side, this is further back, but you could superpose this and try to control what you view of the chapel, imagining this layering of.
But it was cut like this?
That I don't know. Neil.
Hijo, te hago unas preguntas tan chungas, but
the paper historians, as the paper historian I talked to, seemed to have gave me the impression that these were cut more or less at a contemporary moment.
Okay.
So that they may, well, we can't guarantee it, but that they may have had, it may have been some real attempt to collage the different planes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a model.
¿No ves?
Yeah, it's
¿No
kind
ves?
of a
No,
model.
Rafa.
It's a model.
It's a model.
Yeah.
Very precisely designed.
I mean, it may have been a drawing that was done for another purpose and then cut up
See?
to be
It's
reused
a
as
model.
a model.
Yeah.
Or to be adapted as a model.
Mira, Rafa.
And made of different pieces.
No, pero es eso, es un dibujo que es una maqueta.
Let's imagine it
Yeah.
was a maquette.
No, because that's again. But for instance, if you would compare to what Bernini did to work on this, I know of no drawings that are comparable to this from the Bernini design. But you imagine this plate, the square of St. Peter's, that brings the main space of the access to the church further back to the position where you have the ellipse and the obelisk, so that your point of view that defines the image that you have of St. Peter increases the importance of the dome and not of the facade. So that brings the project back to something that centers into the main dome as the key image that you take.
So this is Vaudoyer. In Rome in the 1790s, the story is that he was commissioned by an Englishman for to design a house, and so he's inscribed it. This is in Vaudoyer's hand. First thought for the Casa Cosmopolitana. So it was a conceptual project. These are by Minozzi, developing the because it became a kind of iconic scheme, enormously discussed, very influential with Boulez and so on.
But it's much like what you saw yesterday in the Désert de Retz. It's an enlightened client that wants to project his understanding of the world through a building.
But they were obsessed with this, with also ideal forms. It's interesting. There's a maybe Renaissance idea, the ideal plan, the circle and the cross, and then the longitudinal. There was more the programmatic. It's very also charming. You try to inhabit it, and the way you need to support the sphere.
Yeah, it's kind of like a temple for the intellect with a single window from where you can look out at the world with a dome that represents the cosmos. There's lots of
very inconvenient for all your books.
Of course. So that's the headquarters of SC Johnson, the company that we now know as Johnson and Johnson. It's just north of Chicago in a place called Racine in Wisconsin. It's turned around so that it's at the same position, but they were drawn in different ways. So these are the two floors of the. No, there's magnets. So this is interesting. If you know the project, he was asked by the client to completely reimagine the workspace, and this is in the late 1920s, I think. This building might be wrong, but do forgive me. So this is about creating a collective workspace where he designs everything from the building to the furniture. Tomorrow we'll see the details of the workstations that he develops for this central space that is the common space of the office. And this was a growing company, but at this point it was not the industrial giant it is now. But he was asked by the client, for whom he was also designing a house, to create a completely new way of imagining the workspace, and this is one of the earliest examples of open plan office space. So you had a completely open office space where several functions were coexisting together, and you have here the different functions that exist around this office space, and it's very well known the structural elements that he created to both support the roof and to light the space. It's shaped like a mushroom. There's a central column that opens up like a tree. It has a gigantic slab, and in between the slabs you have skylights that lit all this interior space through the top. So you have this constant source of stable lighting in the office. In the space of this skylight, there's also artificial light installed. So you have, when it darkens outside, the same level of lighting of the workspace. Tradition that continued in lots of office spaces during the 20th century, but this is kind of the prototype of all of that. He had done earlier experiences of buildings that do not exist now in Chicago, but this became kind of the most famous example of this strategy in his designs. And it created a whole culture of office landscape that exists until today. So if you see the recent buildings that Frank Gehry did for Facebook, that Bjarke Ingels did for Google, they are all open plan office spaces where functions coexist, and it's just another iteration of this on a larger scale with a not so interesting design, I would say. But the amazing thing of this design is that there's a conceptual logic that goes from the layout of the building on the site to the details of the furniture, the detail of the lamp that sits on the desk, the chair, everything. They all have a common language or a common design strategy, and that's quite remarkable, thinking of the period and how it kind of redefined office space from then onward.
And was the idea behind it a political idea, that it was a democratization of the workspace?
From the clients, yeah.
From the clients.
From what I know from the correspondence between the two of them, because the story of this project is quite well documented. Both the clients and Wright were pushing for really creating something completely different in the work culture through architectural space, and that's also why the building was so revolutionary as a proposal. Shortly before that, he tried to create an office building that did not have such a powerful client behind it. It was the Larkin building, and it was soon demolished after, I don't know how long after, but the building did not function. And here it did, and it had there was an enormous level of experimental solutions involved. For instance, for the ventilation of this whole space, if you read here, it says nostril, the nose. So he was thinking of how the building breathes and how you create adequate environmental conditions inside the building that does not have a real direct connection to the outside.
I mean, it's also worth, of course, saying that this was in rural Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a skyscraper building, and the key to the plan is that he was able to get light into the central space. I mean, that's what allowed him to produce this very radical solution.
Yeah.
Do you know anything the way he worked with engineers? If that was early on or not? Because this is quite inventive. It's very structural. Then also there's a cantilever in this building. No, it's the one with the glass band.
Yes.
And there's construction photographs. There's quite a large cantilever. So
I know that they created a test for this column and they loaded it.
Really?
On the sides. Yeah, there's pictures.
Okay.
Of that to see how it would withstand and if he had to connect several of them or not. But I don't know a lot. I'm sure that he was because of the type of solutions he was designing early on in his life. He was quite aware of what the structural possibilities of timber and steel were, because from the very early houses, even before the 20th, he had cantilevered roofs and lots of experimental structural solutions. And when he gets to falling water, the scale of the cantilevers of the concrete balconies is gigantic for that time. So surely he had an acute understanding of structural behavior of wood, concrete, brick, all of the materials that he worked on. And surely he worked from early on with engineers. I don't know the names of any of the ones he worked with.
There is a whole book about this project, isn't there?
Yeah. There's a whole book about the two projects, both the office and the house that he did not so far for the Johnson family, that still exists and that you can still visit.
I'm actually just laughing at myself because, of course, yes, it's a democratic program, but the management is all on the first floor, overlooking the workers.
Yeah.
Control.
Well, it was the 1920s. So if that is more or less starting from form, this is more or less starting from space. And as I told you, things could travel from table to table a bit freely. So because there's hardly 100% form or 100% space, but if you remember the houses of Le Corbusier from the 1920s and 30s and his 5 points for a new architecture and his ideas about la promenade architecturale, the way to organize the program along a clearly defined route. This is something that you still find in the work of James Sterling. This is an early sketch for the museum that he built in Stuttgart, where there's a very interesting overlay of two promenades, one that crosses the building without entering it to connect a lower level and an upper level of the city, that goes through this patio here. And goes up to the street. So this is the main street, and there's a back street, and they are about 9 meters apart in height. And he creates a path to go up to the entrance balcony of the building, through the patio, through a ramp, and out to the city. And this is superimposed in a way with parts of the circulation that connect the several spaces of the museum that interact with this ramp, that interact with the patio as well. So there are moments in the patio where someone that is crossing the building from the outside going to the city can view inside the museum and interact with the people that are changing levels inside the museum. So it's the same thing that you would find in the Ville Savoie with the system of ramps that goes from the ground floor to the roof terrace. Same principle that is being developed in a slightly different way because it's interacting to circulation logics, and that someone like Sterling keeps developing throughout his life. And an interesting change that he introduces into this logic of Corbusier is that Le Corbusier had a very I'm not sure how conscious he was of it, but there was an idea of an entrance point and an end point in his circulation. It was a narrative that went from beginning to end. And in Sterling, the more he advances, and this is a kind of a key moment in this change, the more he advances, the less he wants to have a fixed starting point and a fixed end point. It becomes a circulation strategy that has many entrances and many exits, and the buildings become much more flexible through that mechanism. So if you go to the buildings that are done 10 years after this, such as the building that he did next to the Mies Museum in Berlin, this research center that has a very funny plan, because he gets a plan of a fortress, a plan of a church, a plan of a tower, and a pre-existing building, and he creates a circulation space in between them. So the plan looks very funny, and this building has 4 or 5 different entrance points, and there's endless circulation paths in between these main functions that he represents through these typological caricatures of historical buildings. So it's pass on the evolution of an idea that is very clearly defined by Le Corbusier, and then evolves through Sterling or through OMA. This is one of the sketches for the first project that they built, the dance theater in The Hague? Rotterdam, sorry. So the dance theater that was demolished recently, right? Or partially demolished.
Partially demolished. Adapted and partially demolished. Yeah.
So it was the very first project that they managed to build after many speculative projects like the ones you saw yesterday or failed competitions. That was a commission they got and that they built, where they play with the idea of promenade architectural in funny ways. Also, because one of the interesting ideas that they insert on it are plays with the scale of the spaces that in some points make the space unusable. So they tilt the floor slab and the ceiling slab to points where you don't have enough height to pass, and in that way they condition the circulation of the building, which is a principle that they keep applying in several of their designs in the Cursal Museum in Rotterdam, in the Casa da Música in Porto. This theme of the circulation and how you go from main program piece to main program piece through this carefully constructed, materialized path is always an interesting theme of the project, from small scale buildings to large scale buildings. It's something that they focus heavily on, and that is also important 100 years earlier. So this is Joseph Michael Gandhi, the painter that was more or less full-time employed by the office of John Soane to create renderings of the spaces that Soane was designing. So, for instance, if we bring back Palladio as a starting idea for Eisenman there or Soane here, Soane is someone who had a lot of contact with the work of Palladio through the drawings that were present in London at the time that he was working, but he clearly tries to deconstruct the hierarchy of the spaces of Palladio and to create a succession of spaces that have more to do with this than with the compositional grids that Palladio established. So if you go to more complex works of his, such as the Bank of England, you see that clearly, like a processional succession of very beautifully composed spaces, but that create a very complex final building, one that is not very easy to define through a compositional grid as you would with Palladio. So something that is more akin to that, either because he had difficult sites or because he wanted to create spatial contrasts or spatial sequences that were much richer than the ones you could have by having a very stable succession of spaces. And he would use Gandhi to help him visualize the logic of such spaces, how they should be lit. And he's an architect that, for instance, if you are interested in skylights that we briefly spoke about in the work of Wright, he's probably the most amazing figure to look at, because he invented this, a whole array of typologies of skylights. He worked with colored glass to change the nature of a space. And if you ever go to London, the one building that you cannot miss visiting is his House Museum, where that Niall was referencing just a moment ago, and go see the 20, 30, 40 different types of skylights that he tested in his own house, for the space of his breakfast room, for the space of his personal museum at the back, that he then applied in dozens of projects that he developed.
It's worth saying about this that this is a part of a set of drawings. I think we have three, which it's a very late Soane project where he's asked to intervene in the Houses of Parliament in London before it was burnt down, to create or recreate or regenerate a ceremonial route that the king uses when he arrives in Parliament to open Parliament. So it's an absolutely key ritual part of the uses of the Houses of Parliament. So it's just in terms of imagining a route, but he's intervening here in an existing building, and what I think this drawing evidences is something else also, which is that by this stage in his career, and Soane had to work incredibly quickly on this project, by this stage in his career, there's the issues about how you represent the project merge very, very quickly with the issues of design. And what he's doing here is sitting with Gandhi. Gandhi is sketching, and some of the architecture is actually coming from Gandhi rather than from Soane, and you know, so he's a busy man, half blind, working with a trusted collaborator, and in fact allowing the illustrator in some ways to derive the design.
So it was like an exchange between of them, a dialogue.
Yeah.
Because they worked together for most of Soane's career. So
and most of Gandhi's, in fact.
Most of Gandhi's, yeah.
And what came out of this was a highly finished drawing, which served then two purposes. One, to show the client, but also then it became something that Soane used to illustrate his lectures at the Royal Academy and so on. So the product here is quite ambiguous.
To think about the early 20th century dueling logics of composing architectural form through the logic of space. That's a design for Tristan Tzara's house in Paris. Being based in Switzerland, you should know about him. He's part of this large group of refugees that cluster in Zurich, at the same time as Lenin was there or many others. He, in 1916, I think, was one of the founders of the Dada movement in a place called Cabaret Voltaire that he also ran with his group in the center of Zurich, a place that still exists, so you can go and see, and certain spaces are still more or less how he left them with the interventions that they did together. Especially in the basement level, they painted all the walls and the vault of the space, and they created a whole artistic movement out of that to change the logic of the bourgeois society of Zurich at the time. So it's quite interesting to.
They didn't succeed.
They did not succeed, of course, like all avant-gardes. But his story is quite amazing, and how he connects with lots of interesting artists of the early 20th century. When he moved to Paris after the First World War, and he commissioned Adolf Loos to design his house, which is very special because it included not only his house but some houses to rent. So it has a very complex access pattern with several stairs. The house functions with a series of interconnected levels. There's no clear definition of floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, and interesting connections in between each other because of these overhanging views that you have from different levels, and how he recomposes this whole into a kind of a unified building facade is quite interesting. Because of the layering of the planes of the facade, how it creates main openings, and inside these main openings several windows coming at different sides from a large balcony space at the top. And if you want to connect it with Caesar very quickly, the facade of that is what Caesar almost copied to create the facade of one of the towers of the School of Architecture 80 years after that.
Architects copy. Let's copy, but it's difficult to copy.
But architects copy, would architects steal? So
yes, but he said,
like Picasso.
my one professor in the third year told me, copy, Patricia, but be careful. It is difficult to copy.
It is, yeah.
So this is the point. It's not only, it's just to look, understand, transform, and it's not so easy to copy.
Absolutely.
Sí, copiar, copy each other if you can.
So you have these ideas of circulation, how to bind together the whole space of a building, or the complex pieces of a program, and it continues in what Raffael is seeing, which is the early set of sketches for the Governor's Palace of Chandigarh. I believe this was a set that he created quickly before going on a trip to live to one of his collaborators, Julian de la Fuente. So that when he came back from the trip, he would have a final or a set of developed plans to then advance the building.
Oddly enough, the timing doesn't quite work because Julian wasn't in the office at this point.
Okay.
And the story, again, this is wild anecdotal territory, but it's funny.
You have a lot already.
The story that Julian told me was that Julian was alone in the office in the Rue de Sèvres. It was one of those moments when Corbusier had sacked everybody in the office in the late 1950s. And he, on the night before, Nehru, the president of India, had given this speech in which he said, "Our governors don't live in palaces." And so Corbusier came into the office knowing that the centerpiece of his capital composition, the governor's palace, which anchored all the other buildings that he had more or less completed at that stage, would never be built. And according to Julian, he went over to the cabinet where this sketchbook was, ripped out these 12 pages, throws them on Julian's desk and says, "My boy, if you understand these drawings, you understand how a building is made." But it was in a way a little bit Julian's account of why he had the drawings. But, so I'm not sure it's true, but it's still nevertheless quite powerful. The other thing, of course, that's fascinating is there's a sequence of plans at different things. It comes right at the end with a little elevation. So it is a story about the plan being the generator. And it's about these nuance divisions in the elevation between the private spaces and the public spaces. So the ground floor is more or less circulation. The first floor is for receptions. There are then sort of public dining. There are sort of grand dining rooms. There's then accommodation for visitors on the next floor above, and then finally on the top there's this very private space for the governor with his own garden.
Rossi, this is probably the most important project that he did, that kind of allowed him to change the status of his office, because he had been established as a cultural figure. So through the book that he wrote in '66, The Architecture of the City, he was an established teacher in Milan. But in '72 he won this competition for the cemetery of Modena. That is not completely built, but enough of it is built that you can understand what he intended. But it's an enclosure with a series of buildings to house the ashes or the corpses of the dead, with a crematorium space and some chapels in the site to celebrate the dead. And this is a funny drawing because there's many versions of it. It's a drawing where he combines the plan and the facades and the sections of the space. So this is the enclosure block that houses the drawers to put the bed. Super studio that you saw, this is just to show you how these abstract ideas of utopia then become concrete in a specific project. This is a competition that was very interesting. It's probably as relevant as the one for La Villette that you saw yesterday in the hand of OMA and of Cedric Price. This was the Fortezza del Basso, which is one of the fortresses around Florence, and it was a competition for which many famous architects produced designs. Alvarado, for instance, produced a design for this, none of which happened. So in the end, the city decided to do nothing with the competition. But this is the design that Super Studio did. So you see this mega structure that you see in the utopian designs that they create, how it adapts to create a cultural institution inside a pre-existing fortress in Florence. And then just to finish, if you go to London, this is next to the British Museum, just northeast of it. It's Patrick Hodgkins, the Brunswick Centre, which is two parallel housing blocks and a series of collective spaces in the base of the building. It opens this central semi-public or public space towards the city because the block doesn't have buildings on the top, so it creates this interplay of domestic and public spaces in the center of the city of London, which is quite interesting. It's a presentation drawing, but you see this mixing between perspective and section of the ground and underground that allows you to see the several functions that are concentrated in this building, from the cinemas to the commercial areas to the public spaces to the housing blocks and section and the facade.
One second, one thing just hadn't occurred to me until you were talking. The Rossi drawing, the Hodgkins drawing, and the Aspen drawings are all drawings done after the event. So that's for publication. This is for publication, and in particular, the Rossi one is in a way Rossi himself tweaking his own design. What happened with the project was that in more or less in the middle of the actual build, the local council, who were the client, sold the development to a commercial developer, and they changed all kinds of things about the program. So this is a drawing where he's trying to put the record straight. He's actually fighting with the building, not recording it. And one of my favourite pieces on the website is by somebody called Peter Myers, who worked with Patrick Hodgkinson on this drawing, and he describes at quite some length all the choices they made about the perspective views, the techniques for representation that they wanted. And then I remember there's a very funny moment where Peter discovers a Canaletto engraving in a shop in Charing Cross with multiple vanishing points. And this is just what I want, and he doesn't have enough money to buy it, so he has to go to Patrick, and then they come back together in Patrick's Rolls Royce in order to buy the drawing to use it for this and so on. Anyway, so it's a wonderful account of how a drawing is produced collaboratively. With something like this, there's more than one hand at once. It's a good drawing for the table because you can look at it from all angles.
I would have called it model. It's interesting.
This is nice. I like this. He's calling a drawing, you're calling a model.
Yeah, exactly.
I think this is the
but
point.
in a way, we show it a bit idiosyncratically with this frame, but it lives flat. And the reason it lives flat is a wonderful one, which is that this is, we're nearly certain, a design for a bedroom for the Empress Josephine early in Napoleon's career, for this small house they occupied, and elsewhere in Persier's memoirs, he was Fontaine's memoirs. Percier and Fontaine were the two principal architects of the imperial court. Fontaine complains that his biggest problem as a designer for Napoleon is getting the attention of the emperor. And you have this image of these poor people from the office with a drawing in a portfolio galloping to Moscow for 1 second with the emperor to say yes or no. And this is like the solution to the problem, that he has a flat piece of paper that he can put in his portfolio, and then when he knows that he might see the emperor, and the emperor looks, he goes, yes, and then he gallops back to Paris. So it's a strategy for getting the attention of the client.
Fantastico.
But it's so thoughtfully and beautifully made.
No, es increíble.